Welcome to another in our series entitled Midrash as a Psychological Backstory to the Bible. This one is entitled The Confusion of Slaves Chosen for Nationhood. So this ancient rabbinic source, the Midrash that I'm drawing upon, challenges you to put yourself in the mindset of the Israelites in ancient Egypt. Just think of it. You're slaves. Your father has been slaves. Your grandfather was slaves for almost 100 years. And here you are in the most powerful empire in the world, an empire that everyone looks up to, ancient Egypt, and you are the lowliest in that empire. You are someone that can be taken advantage of and abused and killed at will. And suddenly, there are plagues, 10 plagues that are ruining the economy of this great empire, ruining the economy by destroying the livestock and destroying the crops. And the grand finale, of course, is the plague of the firstborn, because the firstborn held a special place in Egyptian society. They were the most powerful ones in the family, and they took very powerful positions in Egypt. So society as a whole was greatly challenged by this plague of the firstborn. So now what are you thinking? Here you are, your self-esteem is probably not very high after almost 100 years of slavery, and suddenly this God is beckoning you to nationhood and trying to elevate you and saying you're going to take you out of here and make you into a nation. So the 10 plagues certainly helped the process of these lowly slaves coming into their own. The Midrash, however, focuses on some small details to help with this psychological backstory that's providing. So the order right before the Jews were expelled, right before the 10th plague, which after that Pharaoh came to Moses and said, "Get out of here, whatever your demands are, I don't care, just leave." So before that happened, the Jews were commanded to do several things. First of all, they had to undergo circumcision. Then they had to take lambs and sacrifice them and put the blood of the lamb on the doorpost. Now, these lambs actually were one of the gods of Egypt. There's almost a slightly amusing midrash in which Moses is asking God, "You sure you want us to take these lambs? I mean, they're sacred in Egypt. You want us to sacrifice right in front of the Egyptians their own God?" And God answers him, and so to speak, swears by the life of Moses and says, "Yes, the Exodus will not happen unless you sacrifice the God of Egypt right in front of them. They should know that their gods are completely worthless." And of course, this was a very strong message to the Jewish people as well, that these great gods that this great civilization were powerless. So that also helped. So the Midrash then focuses on a very small detail. As I said, as you remember the story, they were supposed to take the blood from the sacrifice and put it on the doorposts. And the paintbrush, so to speak, that they used to put the blood on was made from a tree which is considered one of the most insignificant trees. It's called the hyssop, Hyssop, the hyssop tree. And you're supposed to take a bunch of these little leaves and dip it in the blood, and that's what you're supposed to use as your paintbrush. So the Midrash takes this little detail and focuses on and say this is providing a great message. This is part of the psychological backstory, part of raising the self-esteem of the Israelites as they make this transition from slavery to nationhood. So what is it about the hyssop? As I said, it's considered very lowly, but the message is, and the Midrash uses another analogy at first, it uses the analogy of an apple tree. And the apple tree, it seems, gives us very few leaves. And in fact, the apple blooms even before the leaves. And so most people judge the apple tree as not something that's going to provide much shade. So they don't give it much importance at all because they're looking for something very utilitarian. They're looking for shade. it's a very superficial way of judging a tree instead of judging by the fruit and the fragrance and the flavor of the fruit. Most people take a very superficial look at the tree and say, it's not worth much. I don't get much shade. As opposed to the Jewish way of looking at it is, wow, the flavor and the fragrance, which the fragrance and flavor are always metaphors for spirituality and a higher consciousness that you get from something. And so the Jews are, according to this metaphor, trying to change their whole system of ideals of what's important and what's not, from the way the world powers of that time look at something, whether it's important or not, in a very superficial way, to a very spiritual way of looking at things, a very spiritual perspective, which is represented by the flavor and fragrance of the fruit, and is also represented by this seemingly insignificant hyssop, which represents this dramatic change, as I said, in criteria and ideals. And they don't have to look at something that the world seems to be insignificant. They have to look at it through the lens of God and say, no, what does God think is important and not important? And of course, God sees the Jewish people as important enough to give them a nation, make a nation out of them, while God is not impressed with this world power Egypt, who's oppressing people, and their whole economy is a slave-based economy and abusing people. For them, that is the lowest, while the Jews are reaching their potential and becoming a nation, that is the highest. So the Jews have to make this transition. Another detail that the measures focus on is where exactly this blood was placed. So it was placed on the doorposts and the beam that went across. These represent Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, opened the door to the world for those who want to take this kind of spiritual journey to monotheism, and is really based on the fact that the forefathers laid the spiritual groundwork that now the Israelites can enjoy the exodus from slavery. So this sort of gave a reason to believe psychologically of why these lowly slaves are making this tremendous transformation. It is based on something, the merit of their forefathers and a whole spiritual movement that they started. The Midrash also uses this lowly hyssop plant to send another message, and this time it's from God's perspective. Before we were talking about how the Israelites were dealing with their own sense of low self-esteem and making this transition. But now God is saying, I've ordered you to take this hyssop because I want you to understand that I am like a collector of precious items. I know the value of these items, but no one else does. And so you, the Jewish people, are very precious to me. I understand your potential. And although this hyssop represents your low self-esteem right now, I can see into the future and I know what you will become. And so that is why I'm collecting you. If you're having any doubts, please understand I can judge what a precious item is, and I am above time and space. So that's why I am beckoning you into nationhood. Thank you for listening to this psychological perspective on the Exodus. I very much look forward to your comments. Please like and subscribe.